If you go today and you Google search Mumbai local train, you will see amazing videos of like these trains that are just crammed with humanity. The cost of that train ride was roughly 2 cents. And in one flash, I had seen this young lady and she had these white ear pods in her ear. Now, rewind, it seems normal today, but because everybody has an iPhone, right? We all got the white ear pod. But back then, iPhones were really expensive and the white ear pods only existed for iPhones. So I was like, wait, I'm on an overcrowded train where the ticket costs 2 cents. And here's this person who's probably 17, 18 years old who has an iPhone. I was like, something's happening here. This economy must be doing something that we don't actually quite understand.
Welcome to The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. Since 1996, this organization has been investing in the next generation of African American leaders. And this podcast highlights the stories of the scholars, alumni, staff, and friends that make this program special.
Hey everybody, this is Ray Pryor, Ron Brown Scholar from the class of 2015. And in this episode, you'll listen in on my conversation with Caleb Franklin, 2001 Ron Brown Scholar. Caleb is the definition of a global citizen. During his time as a Harvard undergrad, he did research in Trinidad and Tobago. He studied abroad in South Africa. And now he's building two companies, Matter Entertainment and HeyHey, in Mumbai, India. Matter is Caleb's talent agency that he launched with some partners after spending many years working in entertainment in the United States and in Asia. And HeyHey is a venture-backed tech startup that connects celebrities and brands to their audiences through shoutouts and NFTs. It's hard enough launching one company, but in true Caleb fashion, he's launching two at the exact same time. As he reflects on his origins as a kid growing up in South Central LA in the 80s and the 90s, to following a classmate to a random Hindu class, to now being a founder, Caleb shares some of the business and life lessons he's learned from Crenshaw to Hollywood to Harvard to Mumbai. Take a listen.
It's funny, I go back to my old neighborhood and, you got, back then, Crenshaw wasn't a cool thing. I mean, it was cool for the people in the neighborhood, but I think now it's become like this global phenomenon. I'll be in Delhi and I'll see dudes with like a Crenshaw shirt, and I'm like, oh man, that's crazy. Because I grew up off of Crenshaw, like Victoria Avenue, and it was a very interesting dynamic where it was actually, if you look at it structurally, a very nice neighborhood.
Yeah.
We all had lawns, we all lived in these 2-bedroom homes. But that was, the 80s in the middle of the crack epidemic. And so, you'd hear gunshots. I remember growing up and, my dad, who was amazing, and my parents are really the reason that I am who I am. But, he put us in the truck. And back then you could ride in the back of a pickup truck without seatbelts. And it was me and my two brothers. We had these uniforms on. And we were driving to school down Crenshaw Boulevard, and all you could see was smoke because it was the LA riot. And, the entire city was on fire. Well, not the entire city, the part of the city we lived in, where they let people burn stuff down. It's a whole other story. And it was just kind of this wonderful moment of, America at its fullest. But I would say that I had an amazing, amazing childhood. I had a great family, and it was a very distinctly Black neighborhood, which, I'm sure most scholars grew up in neighborhoods that felt uniquely segregated for the time, but it was a very happy neighborhood. And, I was the son of two nurses. So my mother and father, very early in their lives, jumped in a car, drove across the United States and came to California because it was like a place of opportunity. And, my mom was college educated. My dad had a high school degree. I don't think he could read, but he went to a local community college, got his degree, became a nurse. And both of them just hustled it out with three boys. and got up into life. And that's the beauty of America. That's the beauty of California at that time. And we got this home, which is one street off of Crenshaw. And I kind of feel like I've always seen that as a good metaphor for my life, which is this realization that all of us are unique and special because of where we come from, no matter what people think about it. Because Crenshaw was cool back then, and it's definitely really cool now. But I think I've become a very interesting and unique person because I grew up on that edge of what was then South Central LA. Now it's been rebranded because all the homes have been gentrified. But back then, when I went to school, people wouldn't come to your home because you lived off Crenshaw.
Got a lot of interesting parallels in our stories. We could chat about later.
I love that.
And thank you for sharing that. So as you're growing up, we fast forward a bit to high school. You become a Ron Brown Scholar. You go to Harvard. Is that something that were you on the path to go to a place like that and to accomplish the things that you did academically for your whole life, or was that something that emerged later on that might have been unexpected or made possible by events that you didn't see coming?
That's a really great question. So honestly, when I first applied to colleges, it didn't apply to Harvard because I didn't think I would get in. In fact, I didn't apply to any Ivy League schools. I applied to UC Berkeley, which I thought was a stretch, UCLA, and then I think like a few local California colleges. And there was this good buddy, a brother, who was like, Caleb, I don't know what you're doing, but you just need to try. And, I still didn't really think that I should have applied, but this was at the beginning of what is now a great innovation, which is the common application. And so his reference to me was, dude, it's like an extra $50. I was like, I don't have $50. And he said, hold on. And he actually went to the college counselor at the school and said, would you guys sponsor Caleb to do an extra 7 applications? He got that money. And so I had to listen to whatever schools he wanted me just to check off on the box. And that was University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Stanford. And the funny thing was, it turns out that I got into all of them. I think I applied to like 15 schools total. I got into all 15. And I think it had a lot to do looking back, not with my grades. I was a good student. I was a very good student, but I wasn't like the kid with the 6.0 weighted average. I was a kid who like really loved learning, and I was a kid who loved playing sports, and I was a kid who loved being in theater and in student government. And I think that was kind of my path. I never thought that I would necessarily be professor, or like academics was my thing. I was just unnaturally good at either learning and or faking that I had learned. And I have to give my father a lot of credit for this. He said, sometimes you got to fake the funk to get the slam dunk, which means, you got to cheat this way and then go to the hoop. And so I think I'd learned the game a lot earlier, which was helpful. High school was a super fun time. I actually went to a very excellent high school in LA called Brentwood, which I got a scholarship to from my elementary school. But it was a big transition, right? Because my elementary school was 100% Black people. It was this amazing school called K. Anthony off of Crenshaw. But all of these really elite private schools started to come to this elementary school to really find students that could excel in these high schools. These sort of, we call them West Side high schools. Brentwood, Beverly Hills, front. So I kind of had that experience of going from an all Black elementary school to hanging out with the children of multimillionaires, movie stars. When I was in 8th grade, there was a band that was playing on campus called Carlos Flowers, helmed by Adam Levine. and that became Maroon 5. There was this chubby kid that we used to make. We didn't make fun of him. He made fun of us. But his name was Jonah Feldstein. He became Jonah Hill. I mean, it was just a crazy kind of LA place. And, to be coming from the world that I came from into that was at first very daunting, but then very interesting. And so it was kind of a very unique and really fun high school experience. Back to the college of it all, we had this interesting moment where I remember seeing the Ron Brown Scholars Program, and it was early days. So I think there was a book. It was literally a physical book where it had scholarships. And, there was nobody offering a $40,000 scholarship. With the price of inflation, today it's like $100,000 scholarship. So I was applying for like $2,500, McDonald's, all of this. And then there was this Ron Brown scholarship that was like, whoa, write an essay. And so I was really excited about having a chance to apply to it. But then also when I received it, it was just this really huge and amazing experience. That was the thing. And I remember now going back to this high school where, of course, I was student body president. I was, doing theater. I was in the orchestra, I was doing all these things, but everyone was so impressed that I'd won this scholarship for $40,000. It was crazy. That was sort of the beginning of what was the trajectory of what would be my life, is this kind of just juxtaposition of at once being very proud of who I am, of my race and of my culture and home, thrust into this sort of LA, Hollywood, movies, entertainment kind of world and landscape. But then also just thinking, why can't we do things a little differently? Like, when my buddy told me to add a few extra schools, like just try something a little different. Doesn't need to be a lot. Don't be crazy. Just a little different. When you're looking at that book with the scholarships in it, there's a few in there that are 5,000, 6,000. Those are great and they're wonderful. But maybe try for the 40,000. Like just do the little thing, that little stretch. And I think that sort of mentality is kind of what I've been doing all my life. Now, I never knew it would land me up in India. I never knew I'd be making movies and doing all that I do. But it just reminds you the power of doing that little extra and how that can change your life.
Yeah, most definitely. Your little stretch is taking you a lot farther than just the west side of LA now. I'm sure the Brentwood experience there were maybe some parallels to your Harvard social experience and the types of folks you were meeting and had access to. Was the adjustment, you think, a little smoother for a kid from off of Crenshaw because of the high school you went to, going to a place like Harvard, or were there still some challenges there?
Ray, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I just naturally love human beings. Right? You could put me in the middle of Kandahar, uh, and I'd be running for mayor in a year. Like I landed at Harvard, and I was just so overwhelmed by the diversity of people and opportunities. And I had this early freshman year experience where it was myself. There was a kid who was Polish American. There was this kid from Canada, and there was this very uber white Protestant dude from Boston. And that was just my room. And then in my hallway of the dorm was like this vertical dorm, 4 floors, two rooms on each side, 4 people in each. But I had people from Houston who were amazing. I had people from India. I had people from China, right? Like this for me was like the most amazing kind of thing you could have. Like, where else on earth could you be meeting and hanging out with really cool, exciting people and be living with them? And so I kind of did everything I could to meet and talk with everyone that I could, right? And try to really learn something about them and how they thought. And so, I remember there was a guy named Shantanu Dongre who lived across the hall from me. And Shantanu was Indian American, but he was second generation. And it was Shantanu who said to me, like, Caleb, I don't know what you're doing today, but why don't you come to this Hindi and Urdu class? And I was like, is that like a cooking class? Like, what is that? I had never heard of it. He's like, just come and we go get pizza afterwards. He's like, I need to do it because I want to learn the language that my family's from. I want to learn more about India. And I was like, sure, not to say that I thought that it was anything special. Keep in mind, in my first year, I was like going to magic and mythology classes. I took a freshwater systems class, which was about dams, and like there was no plan. It was just like, let's try something a little different. But I went to this Hindi and Urdu class and it just blew my mind. It was the only class I went to that there was like 8 people. So I was like, oh, this might be what I need to boost my grades up for the year. Because some of these, physics and calculus, you know, I could maybe wing it in high school, but at Harvard, I could tell day one they was doing another level of math than we were doing. And so I just decided that day, I was like, I'm gonna just take this for fun. Take it for 6 months, maybe get the professor to like me and see if I can swing the B plus A to kind of weigh or make my overall GPA a little bit better from what I'm probably going to be seeing from advanced, neurocalculus or whatever they have me in. But I wind up staying in that class for 4 years. I wound up getting a certification in Hindi, Urdu. I learned to read Sanskrit. And that was just like, another moment of just trying something completely off the wall. And it kind of stuck and it was fun. And, I didn't forget because there were many days that Shantanu had helped me actually like write my papers and help me get through the class because it was like really complicated. He had some information. So, it was just a lot of fun and I really, really enjoyed that at Harvard. The second thing which was amazing, and I'm going to say this just for the scholars who might hear this, I very early on got hip to the game that there were these research grants that are available at pretty much every university. And those grants allow you to research anything. And this is, another buddy of mine who's like, Caleb, you should really hype the game with these research grants. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, anything that you're interested in, like they'll pay you to go study it. And I was like, what? And so I found this research grant. I found one that was like $2,500 to study any topic of your choice. And at that time, I was doing, as I was telling you, a lot of the Hindi classes, and I was also doing a lot of African American studies. And so I was like, how can I find a way to find a really cool intersection of African American studies, Indian studies, and maybe, have a little fun rather than doing a traditional, summer job. So I won this grant and I actually made a proposal to go to Trinidad and Tobago and study the intersections of culture between Black Trinidadians and Indian Trinidadians. It was so amazing, and it just further opened my mind into identity and like what does it mean to be brown, both from a Black side, from an Indian side, and then also, I was partying in Trinidad for like 3 months, paid. So that was amazing. I did that a few more times. I did it for study abroad when I went to South Africa, right? And was there learning about African history and dance. And so I've always kind of been the type of person to just embrace life, right? Embrace things that you don't understand. Um, and I also understand that the counterweight to that has been I probably did not go as deep into subject matters as some of my other buddies did, right? I have friends who went to Harvard, they were pre-med, they wanted to do HIV/AIDS research to find a cure for HIV, and they just did those classes, right? They may have done a few electives, few hobbies, but they were really deep. But that was what they were passionate about, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just kind of recognized that, like, here's this amazing opportunity to learn a little bit substantively about a lot of amazing things. And, that's why I would be in the libraries. That's what I would be in all of the social groups. I was doing dance. The one thing though that I often think about, now that I kind of live abroad and where the world is going vis-a-vis the US, I would have advised my younger self to probably spend more time with international students. And I know that sounds weird, but I don't see a world where being American, being a global citizen is going to be an option, right? Like when I was coming up, you could just be in the US, you could do finance, you could work in New York, you'd be trading bonds. You didn't really, really need to think very much outside of the West, right? Like, okay, maybe you have to go to London and UK. Maybe a few people was like, I'm gonna go to France because I'm learning French. And that was like wild. Like, whoa, he lives in Paris. She's going to Germany. Today, if you don't understand the impact that the developing world will have on the US and on the global economy, you're just gonna miss it. And I wish that I had spent more time with people from Vietnam and India. Well, I did from India, but China, oh my God, like being part of that China wave. Remember, like in 1987, India and China had the same GDP, right? Everyone had kind of expected that like India and China would go on the same path. And now China has a GDP 5 times that of India, right? So how did that happen? Who are the people who were there? How did they live those experiences? And I wish I would have spent more time. I would tell you one very funny story. Back when I was in college and when I first entered the program, I had locks, right? And so it was me and another African American guy named Derek Melvin. We both had locks. And Derek is also an amazing individual. He's now in finance out of New York, but also a globalist and very, very intelligent. And in college, Derek had made friends with the Prince of Jordan, who was in our class, right? Like, that was just Derek. Now, because I looked a little bit like Derek, because we were both black and had locks, the Prince of Jordan came up to me one day and was just like, Derek. And I was like, oh, no, you talking about the other guy. And he looked a little funny, and then I could see like all of these Secret Service people coming out of the wings. You know, Later on in life, Derek was telling me he went to Jordan to go to the prince's wedding, right? And there he's meeting like Hillary Clinton and all these people. You don't know who you're around, and it's the one time in your life where there is equal access and opportunity to meet anyone. And as you get older in life, your network, who you know, what you know, it actually grows exponentially, right? Like the return on it is not linear, it's exponential to the point where today, like if I need to be in Saudi Arabia, if I need to go to China, if I need to go to, Nigeria, I've got friends that I would have met in college that I can hit up on Facebook. And that didn't happen for the majority of Americans when I was growing up. I think today that's possible. And I think that's very, very exciting. And I think Ron Brown scholars, especially, we got to embrace this because, I do want to go with you to, you know, the Prince of Saudi's wedding. I don't know. Let's figure it out. It'll be a lot of fun.
And that's well said. Your push for us to think globally. And I remember at our conference in August in DC, you were telling a little bit of the story. This is jumping ahead a bit. You were at CAA and kind of yelling from the rooftops to your colleagues about the opportunities that existed in India and in Asia and in other parts of the country. And obviously you end up, I think, launching a few of their divisions in some of those places. Can you take me to some of those moments when kind of everyone was a bit asleep at the wheel about what you saw just from the experiences that you had in your dorm room, talking to different classmates who are from different countries, stumbling into a Hindi class that you end up sticking with for 4 years and traveling abroad and you see something that it sounds like a lot of the entertainment industry was passing on, or it just wasn't even on folks' radar at the time to think
Yeah.
about the market and the opportunity that exists there. Can you share a little bit more about what those experiences were like?
Yeah, dude. I mean, there's that classic saying, like, you know what you know what you don't know, but you know what you don't know that you don't know, right? Like, there is a realm of opportunity that is really kind of hard to understand because you don't know what you don't know. And I think that it hit me in a really crazy way in one particular instance because after I had graduated from senior year at Harvard, Mike, by the way, was like, Caleb, are you sure you want to do this? I had a job at JP Morgan in private wealth management that was paying me more than I would actually be paid. I look back, I was going to make more that 1 year if I'd taken that job, that full-time offer at JP Morgan, than I probably would in the next 6 years. But I did the research game and I got this fellowship to travel anywhere in the world. And I decided after school to travel to India. And I remember landing there and I was taking the local trains to work every day. And my work then was that I was doing a research project in a certain part of town that required me to be on the local train on a day-to-day basis. Now, if you go today and you Google search Mumbai local train, you will see amazing videos of like these trains that are just crammed with humanity. Like there's no place to sit, there's no place to even really stand. I remember there was one day I was tired coming back from work, but it was so cramped that I just wound up sleeping on some dude's shoulder. That dude was sleeping on another dude's shoulder. It was like, where am I? The cost of that train ride was roughly 2 cents, right? That'd be like going from downtown New York to Queens or whatever for like 2 cents. That was the scale of it. And in one flash, I had seen this young lady, and she had these white ear pods in her ear. Now, rewind. It seems normal today, but because everybody has an iPhone, right? We all got the white ear pod. But back then, iPhones were really expensive, and the white ear pods only existed for iPhones. So I was like, wait, I'm on an overcrowded train where the ticket costs 2 cents. And here's this person who's probably 17, 18 years old who has an iPhone. I was like, something's happening here. This economy must be doing something that we don't actually quite understand. And so that moment stuck with me. And of course, I finished out my fellowship. I wound up going back to LA. Funny enough, because Will Smith had done a deal with an Indian movie studio. So I said, maybe I can go work for Will. Work my way up the ranks at Overbrook, which is Will's company. Didn't wind up getting in. But they were like, we like you. Why don't you go work at agency? And that's when I applied to the Creative Artists Agency. And, thankfully for all of my, degrees and the fact that I was student body president at Harvard and all of that, they said, Caleb, you're really smart. You can start in the mailroom, which I thought was like, man, this is the most embarrassing and offensive thing ever. But I did it. And, anyone who's worked at an agency will tell you, you either start like in the mailroom or you start as an assistant. And, luckily, my first bout, I started as an assistant and I was working on this desk of a very big television agent who's probably one of my best friends and a mentor to me to this day, a guy by the name of Michael Rosenfeld. And Michael was at that time characteristically known as a screamer. So if you messed up, he would scream at you, he would throw pencils at people. And I think they put me on his desk as a bit of punishment, right? Because if they, it's like, if he can scream at Caleb, then he's really, something's wrong with him. But, I would live in my first few months of him, basically not screaming at me, but, being very critical and pushing me around. And one thing he said was, Caleb, like, you're not going to make it here if you're going to think you're going to do what everybody else is doing. So you think about what makes you special and see if you can make that work. And that's when, to your point, Ray, that you remembered, I started saying, well, why don't we think about India, right? Like there's going to be a huge opportunity for us to look at a country with, at that point, 1.1 billion people that had this beautiful Bollywood industry that at that time was now expanding around the world. And it was a really great opportunity. And I remember walking into Michael Rosenfeld's office. I handed him this report that I'd written on my own time about what the company's opportunity would be in India. And he looked at it, and in retrospectively, and now I know this, he was like, wow, this is really great. Thanks, Caleb. And I think he probably took that and just threw it in the trash. Because you got to remember at that time, CAA, which is the number one agency in the world, Will Smith, Julia Roberts, the biggest athletes, David Beckham, who came to the United States, he came through CAA, right? So it was this moment. But ultimately, 90% of its business was in a 10-mile radius of our Beverly Hills office. When I was there, the big thing was we had a New York office, right? So the fact that I would think about India at that time was probably in that realm of you don't know what you don't know what you don't know, right? So it was so far removed that I don't blame them for thinking that it was pretty wild. But I wound up being there for a few years, and I didn't stop. I organized a group of other assistants, and we would get together. We would talk about what CAA needs to be doing in Brazil, Russia, India, China, and we would meet and we have reports and we talk. And then I remember one day we were sitting in there and I think I was talking about India and another buddy was talking about Brazil. And the CEO of the company walked into the wrong conference room, right? So it was like, he didn't know this, but he walked in and he was like, I think I'm supposed to be in here. We're like, no, Richard, but if you want, you can sit down for a minute. And he was like, I didn't know there was a group of assistants doing this. So he found out that we were talking about this. And he invited me and there was two other people who had organized this. We just did a quick 15-minute meeting about what we were interested in, and I could tell that there was a part of his mind that's like, why is this black kid talking about India? We're still part of that time, but it kind of stuck with him, and I wound up working my way into the television business, representing writers, doing that. Then I went and started working with technology companies and how they think about entertainment. But all this time, kind of being like, we got to think about India. We got to think about India. And then one day, an Indian billionaire walked into CAA and was just like, I want to buy a movie studio. And interesting enough, the CEO was like, isn't there this kid that's talking about India? And I wound up getting pulled onto the team of people who worked on a transaction, which was an $850 million transaction for this Indian company to acquire DreamWorks, Steven Spielberg's movie studio. By the way, if you watch a DreamWorks film today, at the end of the credits, you'll see a Reliance company. Reliance is one of India's biggest conglomerates. And so I think with that, we that don't know that you don't know kind of got opened up by like, whoa, there's this Indian billionaire who's just buying movie studios. Like maybe we need to think about it. And it was almost like Mansa Musa coming through Europe handing out gold. They're like, there must be something there. And so we were kind of off to the races then. And then they were like, Caleb, why don't you kind of figure this out? And I started off by building our business plan and model in the Middle East, which was mainly around high-end sports, football, basketball. And I lived in Dubai for 3 years while we were building our plan to enter into India, which was really Bollywood and music, cricket. And we did a joint venture in India that I wound up running for 4 years. And so it was just a very, very interesting time. But Ray, going back to what we were saying, being on that edge, just one street off, Crenshaw, just one little stretch, So it's just doing that meeting where you want to talk with the other assistants about international business, although everyone thinks you're crazy. But then all of a sudden the CEO pops in. It's that one little stretch of, this billionaire comes in and the CEO calls you and you go, absolutely, I can do it. I know whatever I'm talking about, but you have no idea what you're talking about because you got to fake the funk to get the slam dunk, right? Like it's that one little stretch to say, okay, India may be a bit too far, but how do we think about Middle East? Because we're already getting into sports. And at that time, CAA was getting into sports and I can help you with that. Not one little stretch to say that. So it was a very interesting time, but it was also, uniquely fun. And I encourage everyone to read a book about CAA called Powerhouse. If you're ever interested in what's happening in the global media business and the Hollywood media business. And I think, where we're going as a global population and how we tell stories to each other and how we do music. Like I just went to go see this Taylor Swift movie in Mumbai, and it was sold out. And so I show up there, and there were like the whole place was filled with young women. And I'd never been in this experience where everybody knew her songs and they were singing her songs, and they were downstairs at that area at the movie theater in the front. They're down there and they're dancing, and I was just like, it's like that iPhone moment where you see those headphones, like something's happening. Like, hey, I don't listen to Taylor Swift, but how in the world did these girls? They grew up in Mumbai and they know Taylor Swift, and they're spending their money to go watch this movie, and they know, like, I don't think these things are novel. I think this is who we are. I think we're all now global citizens. Today it might be Taylor Swift and BTS. Tomorrow it might be someone from Nigeria. It might be hopefully someone from Trinidad. We don't know where it's going to come, but ultimately it's more than just the 5 miles around the CA office in Beverly Hills. So in that way, I think I was right, and that's also led me into why I kind of started my own thing.
Tell me about the moment where you say, you know what, I want to open my own shop. I want to do this, and I want to do this for me. And what led to that decision, and what did that actually look like?
There's something really beautiful about being in the business that I kind of grew up in, which is the talent agent business, right? Like, you spend your life honestly helping rich people get richer. Anyone who's in finance, sorry, you're spending your life helping rich people get richer. But these are really, really great places to understand how rich people think and how the world really kind of works. And you get to do it at very high levels with very, very smart people. And so you can be around that enough to see that the people who are really, really rich at some point took a risk, at some point decided and discovered ways to own the upside or the benefit from taking that risk, and really figure out the ways and means to make sure that they're continuing to earn on that growth that they created. And so, that comes in a lot of forms. That could be a really great employment agreement that's structured really smartly, right? Like, I have friends who have great jobs, and I never forget this at CAA, and this is just a tip for scholars. Someone said to me, get an employment lawyer to negotiate your contract, your employment contract. Like, I'd always grown up in a world where you walk into a room, they tell you how much you're going to get paid, you sign the contract, and you just keep moving. But then I learned that really rich and successful people, they do two things. One is they ask each other how much they make, right? Like, I remember growing up saying that's such a white people thing. Like, like walking around. I have one of my best friends. He used to walk around the office and just ask people, "Hey, how much are you making this year? Like, what do you make?" He was just sizing us all up. He never really kind of tell us what he was making, but he just wanted to understand what the market is and that he was always making more, right? Like that was wild to me. That was number one. So getting that information around what people are making. And the second thing was to hire an employment lawyer, which, at that age, I was probably I was probably like 29. So I was like, a lawyer? Like what? Like, what are they going to do for me? Why would I spend money on this? I was like, Caleb, do it. Turns out, like, this lawyer got me all these amazing things in my employment deal. My salary went up. All of a sudden, I get my house paid, get the car, I get a little, golden parachute package. Right? I'm like 29 years old. I'm like, how in the world did this work? And it's just like, someone hyped me to the game, right? Like, you got to figure it out that way. And so, third thing that I kind of saw was really smart people work in a business, drive a lot of value for those people, do great work. And then at some point, when you start doing things like opening up new sectors and markets, you're either going to get some equity in the company or you're going to get equity by doing it yourself. And so I think it was about 4.5 years into India. What had happened was we decided as CAA to move out of the joint venture. And so basically it was like me by myself. I'd hired 2 or 3 people to kind of rebuild the process because it was no longer a joint venture. Something happened with that. And so we were going to do it ourselves. And I called my boss, who was then the global COO of the company. And I was like, Mike, is there any way I can get some equity in this? Because it's kind of like me building this. Like I don't think anyone else in the company could do it. And by the way, I'm happy to just take some points, some equity in just the India business. But there's no way that you can pay me probably what the value of this will be long term and all that. And there's also the blessing of being a really culture person in your organization, of being someone who's dedicated fully to your organization. Because in that moment, my boss said to me, Caleb, honestly, I would love to if I could, but we can't, right? Like we have investors in us. And, why don't we just pay you out in bonuses? And it was like a voice in the back of my head. It just kept telling me that Black people shouldn't build businesses and not have equity in it anymore. Why? Like who else would just do this and not own a piece of it, right? And you asked, and they said no. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to go out on my own. I'm going to take a risk. And I went back to CAA and I said, look, guys, I actually think this is a very valuable market. I'm going to invest my own money to build this out. But I want to do that in a world where I own some equity. And I know you guys can't give it to me. Let me build something and you guys can come back and buy it. And they were like, Caleb, we love you. Like you took us there. We don't want to be in India if you're not at the company. So why don't you just take the business? So actually CAA India became Matter because it was sort of like a blessing that they did this because we helped them out so much. And it's also the culture that companies are Read Powerhouse. We still work very closely today with them and we love them. So that was day one. But, I don't think I would have ever been able to see that was a possibility unless that voice was in the back of my head of like understanding how other people have been successful and then plotting a way and charting a way and then having the kind of gumption to go and ask my boss like, hey, can I have a piece of this? And him kind of saying like, I wish, but can't, but I want you to be very successful, wink, wink. And then that kind of happened, right? So it's just that little stretch once again, right? Like that little stretch of saying like, all right, I'm already kind of like doing all this. What happens if I want to do this for myself? And being worried that like if you do it, like you're going to be fallout, nothing's going to be there, and then full abundance comes to you. So that started to journey with Matter, and that was now almost I think 9 years ago. But it's been like off to the races since, in a lot of great ways. And it doesn't help that India's now the 5th largest economy in the world. Funny enough, India, which was once a part of the British Commonwealth, surpassed the UK's GDP 2 years ago. And as of this year, its GDP is larger than the entire British Commonwealth combined, right? India is bigger than that. So we're just on this path where growth is insane, the youngest population in terms of numbers on earth. And so it's like lean in. And it's just been a really amazing to kind of find all of these opportunities in what was, for me, a class that I took because Shantanu said, come with me and we'll go get pizza. But like retrospectively, it doesn't make sense. But today, everyone, will say, wow, Caleb, you were so brilliant to kind of think about this. And, honestly, none of this was really kind of thought out. It was kind of just following what I enjoyed and meeting and embracing new people and kind of sniffing out what the opportunity is.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When does the story begin for HeyHey? And can you tell a little bit about what the platform is and maybe what it was originally and how it has grown since then to what it is today?
Well, HeyHey is a beautiful story. It's beautiful. It's so perfect, right? And it follows that same kind of template, right? Like we had, in the agency business, being an agent, in effect, what you are doing is that you are working with very large artists and celebrities, and you are negotiating, identifying opportunities for them to grow their career, make money, doing the contract, and a lot of that is networking and figuring out. Now, what most people won't tell you is that sometimes these deals take, a good week, 2 weeks to get going. But most of the time, it's like a month, month and a half that it takes to get these deals closed. And there was this business called Cameo that had started in the US where you could book a celebrity shout out and you could do it instantaneously. And that just blew my mind because I just saw a leap in, wow, you could actually engage. I wasn't actually thinking about like how cool it was to get a shout out from a celebrity. I was thinking about, here are people doing deals with celebrities that take nanoseconds. And in that, I said, this is the end of my business. If a celebrity can do a deal in like 1 second, why do you need this whole cadre of agents and like lawyers? Like, it was so brilliant and beautiful. And, I wanted to figure out more about it. And so I actually emailed the CEO of Cameo, a guy named Steven Galanis, who's a good friend and, a great guy out of Chicago. And I was like, look, Mr. Galanis, I just want to talk to you because I think that this technology is really cool. And that led into a great friendship between me and Steven. Steven actually came out to India. He met with a bunch of people in the space. And at the end of it, he was like, look, Caleb, I love you. Why don't you run Cameo India? And I said, Steven, that's great, but why don't we find a way to like partner or work together, right? Because like, I don't know if I want to, what I got going with Matter is working really well. And so I said, let me build, same thing I said to CA, let me build it and then you buy it if it's successful. If it's not successful, then, whatever. You didn't waste your time. I didn't waste my time. And so I then set out, because I had all these great celebrity relationships, to build what would be the Cameo of India. Interestingly enough, I got some of our friends from Japan. I do a lot of work in Japan, another story for another day. They came in as co-investors and we launched HeyHey, which was a platform for you to book a shout out from your favorite celebrity in India and in Tokyo in day one. And we actually had our announcement in Tokyo, which was really fun. Over the span of a year, we loaded up we did 15,000 celebrities were on our platform and still are, but it was just a tremendous journey to kind of build that product, to understand what customers want, to do the transactions. But I will say, like, we very quickly began to see a few things. First thing is, unlike the US, in India, the mass of people who are still kind of growing didn't necessarily have the discretionary income to book or pay $10,000 to get a Bollywood celebrity to wish them happy birthday, right? Like India is rich, but a lot of its people are still poor. So we're still in that developing curve. And so we discovered that like it was easy for us to get a $50 to $100 shout out done, but hard to get that person to come back and transact again. And hard for us to really grow and find new customers without spending a bunch of money, which means your product doesn't have product market fit, right? And it was one of those amazing things where, as much as we tried, if we spent money, if we spend $100, we can get $80 in, which is never a business that will be long term or sustainable. So once we saw that, we quickly pivoted. And this was also in the moment of NFTs, right? So everyone, you have Bored Apes, people buying this. And we had all these celebrities who were calling us on our platform saying, hey, the shout outs aren't doing what they're supposed to do, but why don't you help us make NFTs? So we did that. We did a good amount of money, like building out these NFTs for big Bollywood celebrities. We did one with, a big actor where, like if you bought certain combinations of them, you can go skydiving with this person. You can go to a dinner just by owning these NFTs. People loved it. We had customers all around the world. Boom, India enacts anti-crypto legislation. So all of a sudden now, customers have a hard time buying the product. Celebrities are wondering, hey, is this going to work? And so It was another moment where we had to pivot. What was really cool was we had understood that people kind of liked these digital collectibles, and we now knew that we had the technology to build them, and we had all these celebrities. Why wouldn't we just go to brands and create basically non-crypto NFTs as loyalty programs for people? And that actually now has taken off like hotcakes. So we work with Toys R Us in India. We work with Lee Jeans, Wrangler. We basically power this sort of NFT loyalty program, which because it's on blockchain and because it's NFT, it allows us to do some really cool things. But but yeah, it's I will say it's not been, that fairy tale story of you started a business in a garage and it's worth $1 billion in 6 months. But the truth of it is that 99% of any businesses, and especially tech businesses, you know, these are these are real hustles. These are real hustles. And I would just say one last thing on this point, which is I think in our modern day society, there's a lot of wanderlust and a lot of media that kind of celebrates or puts entrepreneurs, especially in the technology world, as almost these gods. Like we worship Elon Musk. He's so amazing. But now that I've been in this game, I would tell you 85% of these companies, these startups actually fail, right? Like maybe it's less, but it's higher than 50%, right? Like the failure rate is high. Founders who build these companies are stressed, right? Like I heard this amazing story of this founder who raised a bunch of money, built this company, and basically to raise the money, he had given up 90% of the company. He owned 10% of it. And after 10 years, he decided to sell the company and they sold it for like $60 million. Great outcome. Great outcome. But what it turns out is that he had spent these 10 years working his life away. He got a divorce, right? Like it's really hard. And if you think about it, yes, the company sold for 60 million. I'm sorry, no, it wasn't 60 million. I think it was like 6 million. Sorry, something 6 or 10 million or something like that. But basically, he wound up with 10%. It was like $600,000. And if you look at that journey, if you were an employee at a very good company with a good job, 9 to 5, you would have had a better outcome than this guy, right? So I think the truth of the matter is, I don't want to glorify being a founder, an entrepreneur. I also don't want to glorify being a full-time executive. You got to find what works well for you, but don't believe that one is necessarily better than the other. Don't believe that on average there are better outcomes, right? Like you got to be happy and confident with what you're doing. I will say that I tend to see outsized returns for people when they're entrepreneurs, but the downside of that is that a lot of them fail. So take it for what it may be. Matter has been a very, very extreme success. Hey, we're working on it, right? We're working on it. We'll get there. We're seeing good things, but it's a slog, right? It's that day to day showing up, doing the work. That you might see the glory side of it, me doing this podcast, but there's times when you're pivoting your business, you got to do layoffs, right? Like who wants to do that? I've had now this experience of working with people, helping them find other jobs. But boy, it really hurts when you build these teams and you have to let them go for whatever reason in the business. So yeah, it's an interesting journey, and I think I don't want to over glorify it, but if it's right for you and you're thinking about it, I think you should take that risk. If you like your job and you're making good money, maybe don't move.
Right. What is the experience been like for you building the companies kind of side by side? And obviously they are related and probably feed into each other well, and your skills lend themselves well to leading both. But splitting your brain in anyway, beside more than one, can be taxing, take a toll. What is that? What
Yeah,
has that experience been like?
it's been taxing. It's not easy. It's not easy. And I feel like it's been a wonderful experiment for me to understand two types of entrepreneurial journeys, right? So if you look at Matter, which is private, self-funded, I have partners in the business, of course, but there's no outside financing for Matter. And then you look at HeyHey, where we raised venture capital. I have, big strategic investors out of Japan. There's just a different business culture in each. And, it has made me really understand sort of that trade you take when you take investment. And I feel like we're also in this world, going back to what I was saying earlier, where we kind of worship, oh, wow, this company raised $10 million. This company just did a Series B at $100 million. And I have so many of my founder friends who are like in these companies that are burning cash, haven't been profitable, raise $100 million, all chasing this unicorn dream. And, there's a lot of value in that. But I do see a lot of people burn out. I see a lot of burnout because what happens is that like you go into a world where you are actually forced to accelerate the growth of your business at all cost. Cost to yourself, cost to the business, cost to team. Like at the end of the day, your investors want to know, am I going to get this money back with not a 10% return, with a 5 to 10x return in 3 to 5 years? And you're not doing that for one investor. You're doing that for like 50 investors, individuals, VC funds, right? It is a very, very high paced, crazy journey. And, I would say thankfully, as taxing as it is, it's been one that's been beneficial for us. But I then compare that to, Matter, where, that is one where we'll talk with my partners. We may delay taking a business decision that we feel we may be able to address better in 6 months. I couldn't do that in Hey. And Hey, I'd have to do it. I'd have to make it and I'd have to go and we'd have to burn. Whereas in Matter, you can kind of sit back and play an ultimately a long game. And what's very interesting is that in Asia, you have a lot of businesses that operate like families versus company. And I'll just spend 5 minutes on this. It's something I would love to like one day write a book on. When you meet like an Anand Mahindra. Anand Mahindra is the largest, he's an Indian billionaire. He runs the group called Mahindra and Mahindra. Um, funny story, when I first landed in India, he was a Harvard grad. I reached out to him. We met. He loves jazz. He loves African American history. He was a film major. We've become friends, right? So he's one of my buddies and mentors for many, many years. And overall, just a humongous, amazing individual. But I think he's like the third or fourth richest man in India. And, they're the largest manufacturers of tractors in the United States. So like you think it's John Deere, it's actually an Indian company that makes most of the tractors in the US. But Anand, when I meet him, I understand that he is building a business for the next 500 years, right? Like my question to him was like, why didn't you invest in Facebook? Did you feel that was a mistake? He says, of course it was a mistake, but but you have to realize that like it was a very risky proposition when you first probably saw that there was some kid from Harvard who built this social media site. Like he's thinking about like, how do I own tractors in the United States, right? Like that's 100-year thinking, 2,000-year thinking. And you can do that in a world where you have family and you have legacy and you're just building. And I feel like those businesses are really interesting to me. I love those models. It allows you to kind of sit back and not be so flushed about what's happening tomorrow, and allows you to kind of sit back and say like, what's going to be happening in the next year that we need to prepare for, that's going to be a very, very big win for us, and let's get that set. Whereas I think in this tech startup VC ecosystem, echo chamber, you've got to deliver returns every 3 months, right? Like you've got an investor update that you got to send, and it needs to say that you added 5,000 new customers. It needs to say that you added 10,000 new celebrities. The nice thing is that we were able to do that. But, you know, I think they're two different business models. And I tend to see that a lot of the people that I like kind of run businesses that are sort of these family. I've been grocery stores. I started with this one grocery store. We built it for 10 years, and then we now have 2,000 grocery stores across the southern United States. Like those are those silent billionaires. Like I met this dude whose family makes baby cribs, right? Like he's from Kentucky, and they make cribs. You would never know this guy. I've never heard of this company, but he's the largest manufacturer of baby furniture in the United States. Billionaire. Right. Like now he goes and invests and he has fun and he has the fun money. But his family's been building that for and he's thinking about generational wealth. And so I feel like, there's no wrong way to go about it. You got to figure out what your style is. I have enjoyed deeply learning much more about engineering and coding and tech and where technology is going to take us. I think we are going to have to find a way to do it. And we have found a way to do it where it doesn't take multiple millions of dollars to launch a technology business. And I'll just say one thing because I think this is important for scholars. When I first started HeyHey, to build a website, we needed like 20 engineers. I had to go out and we scoured India and the world for the best engineering talent. They got paid very meaningful salaries, and it was a wonderful product. Today, I can do the same that I did with like 15 engineers with two and Microsoft Copilot, which is an AI software, right? Like I have a buddy who knew nothing about coding, who had $100 monthly subscription, and he built an AI influencer just through Copilot. So the moat, the amount of money it takes to build a piece of software is almost like becoming as close to zero as it's ever been. And so you can be in a world where you can build a technology company today without needing multiple millions of dollars. So you maybe don't want to think about going out to VC. Maybe you want to come and talk to us at the program, speak to Ty Moore, speak to Ray. Hey, who can I connect with? They might want to throw in a bit of money, and I don't give up 90% of my company. I give up 5%, 10%, and then use these AI tools to build it. Because I've never seen a more exciting moment for people who are very, very interesting, design focused, empathetic, to build technology businesses in a way that was completely impossible before.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. If you want to hear more inspiring conversations like this one, don't forget to click subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about the organization, check us out at ronbrown.org.